Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proof.
This is Dan.
This
Stone.
is Dexter from The
This
Offspring.
is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is David Labb.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
I'm Christopher
This is
Knopf.
Dr. Bob Greenberg.
I'm Laird Hamilton.
This is Michele Rigby Assad, author of Breaking Cover on the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
This is visit number 2 from Michele. As she said, she is the author of Breaking Cover. Her website is micheleRigbyAssad.com. You guys have to, first off, go back and listen to the episode that we did together because it's hashtag Spy versus Spy, and you never get to hear these kind of conversations because we're going to talk. But it gets even better because I'm sitting across the table from co-best-selling author, because Scott also has a best-selling book called Echo in Ramadi. And so we're going to have 2 authors writing about their experiences from the same time frame, I think. And you're a ground commander doing Marines in Ramadi in one of the hardest fights. Meanwhile, Michelle's back in the green zone sipping champagne, wearing a smoking jacket. And
lounging by the pool at this CPA, yeah. I've been there, too.
Don't forget about salsa night, you know. Did you guys do salsa night in Ramadi?
We were a little busy to partake in the salsa night, but...
Am I correct?
Where was salsa night? I wasn't there for that.
Are you talking chips and salsa or dancing? Because that would have been extravagant.
The Green Zone salsa night, always wonderful. Michele, am I right thinking you guys overlap? You guys were both there in 06, is that right, Scott?
Yeah, I was there. I was in Ramadi in 06. We got in country in November, so I'm not sure if you were still there.
Yeah, I was 06, July 06 to July 07. So I was definitely feeding intelligence your direction for actioning.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective is when you talk about push information, you know, guys on the ground, we always want information and supply pushed to us. And how that conduit from that, which I know that nucleus at in Baghdad, especially from the Coalition Provisional Authority, was, I think, like, the best example I could give to listeners is it was like a Star Wars cantina. I mean, there was everything from like business casual to full suits and guys in their alpha dress uniforms, and then, you know, crazy spies like you running around, and then tactical guys and contractors. So, you know, was there a channel, was there a conduit that you were pushing information to outlying cities like Ramadi where, you know, we were really engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys got stuff from my colleagues directly in Ramadi, and then also you got a lot of stuff. I worked very closely in Baghdad on the terrorism recording, so all the Sunni and Al-Qaeda and Iraq stuff that dealt with Ramadi was coming either from them directly or from me in Baghdad.
Yeah, so one of the great successes, Pete, that we had was, you know, this was the era of the, you know, the awakening,
right?
And the Sons of Iraq that really helped squash any of those smaller factions that were going on, and part of that was through 1st Brigade Combat Team, which was commanded by Colonel Sean McFarland, and then I was working at the time for Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Ferry, former soft dude. We called him Combat Chuck because he was so switched on, but he really was vital in using that information. So whatever you were pushing to us was helpful, because when I turn it back over to you, tell us about what you were feeding us, and I'll tell you the result was we didn't get mortared a whole lot. And that was a big game changer for us, as it gave us what we call freedom of movement on the ground to really patrol aggressively, hunt and attack and kill the insurgents where they were hiding. And it gave us unfettered access, because when you're getting mortars lobbed at you from these insurgent pickup trucks, that hampers your day. It really
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure does. Actually, we had a couple of sources that we ran out of Baghdad that were very Ramadi-centric. And one guy in particular was an incredibly efficient and good source. And what was, people don't understand this whole synergy thing. The fact that we could pass you leads, pass you intelligence, you guys action them, and then you can tell us immediately if that was good or bad intel. And that would be some of the most integral stuff for us to know whether we had a double agent or a fabricator or a really good source.
Yeah, that double agent thing is huge. On the Army end, our human collectors were so green. You know, my first question to them as someone who knew a little more about the business was, who's running who? And they're like, oh, well, no, this guy goes camp to camp giving out information. I'm like, well, who does he belong to? You know, like, and it was really hard for us to, ego gets in the way. Like, I'm a great collector. And you're like, are you? because it seems like you're being run. Like, this guy's desperate to get you to go out into
what
this
do they call
village.
that guy? Handler. Like, who's your handler? Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, who's your handler? Exactly. Yeah, and for these guys, they were so green, it was hard for them to even understand that there was somebody else trying to run an op on them. And even if that person was genuine, it's not how it's done. Like, Michele doesn't, and I'm not going to speak for the CIA too directly because that's your job, but Michele's not going to talk to someone that's also talking to DIA, NSA, FBI, Army. Like, she's just not. She's like, you need to go. You are not my person. And it gets really, so intel for you as a commander, it gets really bad when, like, you send guys to the THT, like in your book you talk about it all the time. We have rules on how we have to address these guys and what's useful and what's not, because I don't want to send you into a house that's a trap or into a cul-de-sac that's nasty for you guys. That's the worst thing. I'm trying to prevent stuff, but I also don't want you to get caught up in something ugly.
Yeah. I think the way I describe it is, we collect all these little bits of information, and Michele can talk about this. Is like at that stage, at that level, when every Marine is a collector. Those sets of eyes and out there. I had 250 sets of eyes from the Marines, Army, Navy, contractors at times. They're collecting bits of information. We put them in a bucket, and then we ship that bucket back to our intel cells or THT or human. And then ultimately, I'm hopeful that people like Michele are getting, huge buckets of information dumped on their desks, which they reassemble and turn into what we call intelligence.
Yeah.
Is that close, Michele?
I did my best to read as many reports as I could from the different agencies so that it could give me a bigger picture of what I was dealing with. But I think fundamentally it would have been the analysts back in DC that were putting it all together and trying to make sense of it in terms of big picture.
So so that's a huge pipeline to go all the way back to DC for those guys to analyze that and then turn it around. I mean, we don't want to talk about, how long it takes us to turn that information around, but like that, I think most listeners don't understand it's such a huge network of people dedicated to taking all this information and making it usable and turning it into intelligence where we can go back and actually target demographics, we can target different factions because, I always talk about, in Ramadi especially, we were fighting about 5% that were hardcore, AQI, and then there was probably another 5%. This is one of Pete's favorite words, co-belligerents. That they kind of just want to step up and get in the game and make a name for themselves. But finding out who the bad guys were was always a challenge for us.
Huge challenge. One of my favorite stories from the book and from my experience was one particular source who called us one day and said he lived in the Ramadi area, so he lived in your AOR, and he said, I just saw a guy coming out of an abandoned building, and he looked like Al-Qaeda. Okay, so how did he look like Al-Qaeda? Do you have a T-shirt on that says AQI? And he just didn't look right to me. And he goes, I just have a bad feeling because my cousin owns that building. It's supposed to be empty, but somebody's using it. And so normally, as you know, that doesn't meet threshold for dissemination. But you guys had been telling us, we think there's a safe house around here, but we can't find it. So being in contact with you, hearing from you, we have this hole we need to fill with intelligence was helpful. So we ended up passing that to you guys and saying, we don't have a lot of detail, but this is what our guy just said. And then the person that I was speaking with on your end said, do you trust this information? Do you trust your source? And of course, you take a big gulp and because you guys are, if I say, yes, I like him, he's good, you're going to risk your lives rolling off the compound and going to check that place out. And is it a double agent or is he a good source? And I, said a quick prayer. I was like, you know what? My gut tells me that, you can trust this info. You guys hit that safe house. And you hit that building. It did turn out to be a safe house. You found 5 or 6 tortured Iraqi guys who'd been held by AQI that were almost dead. Like if y'all had shown up a day or two later, they'd have been gone. One of the rooms was filled with corpses almost up to the ceiling, villagers who wouldn't participate with AQI and wouldn't support them, and then another room full of weapons. And so that, to me, was such an interesting And then you guys came back and said, here are the pictures of what we saw inside that safe house. And that kind of partnership was amazing.
Yeah. That's something I think it's interesting to hear that from your perspective too, is as a disseminator of those reports and hearing that, because oftentimes those that have been in that area, I always say it's so important to let people that want to really, scrape below the surface and understand what's going on in this region, that these things that you just mentioned, I'm glad you write about them in your book Breaking Cover, because they are really essential so people understand that this is not urban legend. This isn't stuff that happens on the big screen. These atrocities, this gross breakdown in humanity, seeing and having seen these things up close and personal myself, the beheadings, the murder, the bodies, and this rampant destruction that the insurgents used to just get their hateful ideology across. This happened. This is not science fiction. This is real. And when you write about it in Breaking Cover as nonfiction, I mean, that is an important chapter in American history. That one that we're still fighting. And I don't know if you ran into this when you were publishing your book, but hey, what do you categorize it? Is it history? Is it current events? I'm like, well, if it happened yesterday, it's history in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I was on that dilemma too. Like, well, it was only 11 years ago when this happened. So where do we put this? I said, I don't care if it happened 2 minutes ago. It's history.
Yeah.
And people need to know this. We don't need to be in a position as artists or authors or historians or journalists to say, let's just wait 50 years to tell this story, because then people will be ready to hear it. Did you run into that?
Yeah, they didn't know how to categorize my book because they peeled back the layers of the onion to tell stories about what you and I did every day, but also it was an inspirational book. Really, the whole point was to inspire people to live a life of courage. So they're like, we don't know how to categorize. Is this a book of faith or inspiration or intel or what?
Yeah, I think in your breadcrumbs, on Amazon, it's like political science and government, terrorism. It should have one that says badassery.
Oh, yeah.
Kick-ass chick in the CIA.
It took me,
number one bestseller of badass chicks in the CIA.
It took me forever to read her book because I'd read it. I think I told you this, Michelle, but it was so true. Even though we worked in different agencies and everything, I'm like, yeah. And then I would be off on my own chapter of the book that I haven't written yet. I'm like, it was just like this, and all these things and all the details. And like Scott, when you talk about just the specific details, like a 9-line medevac being grease penciled onto the window, I'm like, yes, that's everywhere. And it's those details like that you guys both drew out that send me as a reader, obviously with a lot of context. I'm off into that context, and it opens up a whole new world of thoughts and memories for me. When you guys got into these contextual things, the 9-line medevac, how to call for fire, and all those things. I mean, those are things like you go to training and you learn how to call for fire and close air support and all that. But you don't, unless you're going to use it a lot, it's gone instantly. You just know that there is an order, there's a simple form, and you just have to know where it is. Like as a civilian in a patrol, like if I'm calling in a 9-line, I'm going to be like, get over here now, here's the grid, done, and then they're going to come, because if I'm talking to them, it's a real problem. But what kind of contextual things did you guys find in your books that you're like, yeah, this really stuck with me and it really helps tell the story?
For me, it was the psychology of dealing with the source. I mean, it's not blowing anything up, it's not shooting one, it's not driving a fast car, it's just what happens when you're sitting across the table from a dude who has learned how to lie in order to survive under Saddam Hussein and his crazy culture of intelligence agencies and all these people reporting on each other so Saddam Hussein could stay in power. So as an intelligence collector, how do you deal in a culture that's very used to lying in order to survive? Like you guys were mentioning earlier, nobody wants to hear their baby's bad, but learning about your source and being on top of the fact that you could, that they're not necessarily giving you good information is something really important as a collector that you have to understand. And so getting into that psychology or the weeds of it is what I found fun to do in my book.
That's interesting, because to explain that culture, and I think we in this generation as warfighters, or whether you're a collector working for the CIA or a contractor, understanding that culture that is so foreign to Americans that it is perfectly acceptable to lie in that culture. It's as if telling, somebody that, hey, yeah, you look great in that shirt, and it's the worst shirt you've seen in your life. But it's on a whole different level. And Pete's wearing a Break It Down shirt today, so he looks fabulous.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm still waiting for my T-shirt. Michelle, have you asked him for a T-shirt yet?
Not yet.
Yeah, he's slacking on the swag. But to understand that lying is perfectly acceptable, and you're right. You're sitting across the table, and you know all the words coming out of his mouth are complete and utter lies. And to find a way to circumnavigate that cultural, divide and use what he's telling you in a different way to be effective on the battlefield. Because at the end of the day, for me, I want to hear your mission. My mission was to kill or capture anti-Iraqi forces, period. We weren't fighting politics, policy, or strategy. We were there to kill the enemy.
And we were there to provide you with the information you needed to do just that. That's exactly our mission.
Yeah, and I think it was highly effective because we were very fortunate in that environment, in that city of Ramadi, which was the deadliest city in Iraq, to be surrounded not only by our Army counterparts with Task Force 19 Infantry and all the Army units, but also, Navy SEAL teams, Special Forces, OCFI groups, which stands for Other Coalition Forces Iraq. It's all these weirdos that run around in uniforms sometimes, not uniforms, beards, no beards, crazy guns, and they do cool things to help root out those surgical targets that you provided the information for.
Yeah, and I think that people don't understand the loop of intelligence. It's not enough to just gather that intel, but it is absolutely critical to create a positive relationship with your counterparts, a healthy one, where you felt comfortable telling us whether this was good info or not, and us, seeking that out and welcoming that feedback so that we know if. I remember there was a period of time in which there was a particular source telling us that there were missiles located in an orchard. And I mean, this was like his favorite reporting topic. And after weeks of that, I remember reaching out to you guys. You guys are going into the orchards. Are you finding missiles? They're not that hard.
Yeah, they're missiles. Yeah.
And finally, somebody's like, yeah, your information is crap. I'm like, you know what? I want to hear that. I want to know that from you, because every time y'all roll off that base, your life is on the line every single time. And I'm not okay with feeding you bad information.
Just having to snoop around, playing.
Could you take a look over there behind the Arby's?
Hey, Echo Company, I got a great scavenger hunt for you on these Freddy's today. Check this out.
Yeah.
We didn't really experience that.
Oh no.
No. A lot of the HVIs, which stands for high value individuals, which are the actual bad guys, or HVTs, high value targets, that we were given. And for the readers, it's not rocket science, although we're talking about rockets and missiles earlier. Yeah. We get this information or this intelligence, say, hey, go here, and we're breaking out our maps in the planning process, and we're drawing red squares around houses on satellite imagery, and we're saying, yeah, we're going to go crush these guys at 3 a.m. and rattle the piss out of them. And normally they'd be asleep, because you know what? The insurgents, they were also lazy. Right. They didn't like to fight. They had a time, time expiration date. They'd go for a few hours, and then they're zonked out. And that's normally when we nab them. And when we'd pull them in, they'd usually first lie. Yeah. Say, oh, no, this is not me. This is not bomb-making material. It's for my radio business. No, there's explosives and wire. So
this is my auntie's.
I don't know too many exploding boom boxes.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this then, Michele. As you try to sort out deception, and people... I'll say this. You don't have to say it. I'll say this. As someone who's collected and talked to a lot of people, I'm not a magician. I will tell you what I think, and I'm probably wrong more often than I realize. It is hard to detect deception. But my meter, so I had to learn to set my meter somewhere different. So I always set it on liar, liar, pants on fire, and then slowly allowed it to creep up as they told me truths. But how did you get through that whole... Look, everybody's doing this. I was told by Iraqis all the time that Americans were too trusting. That's what taught me to turn my meter to liar, liar, pants on fire. But how did you figure that out?
Unlike a lot of my colleagues, I'd spent so much time in the Middle East. I studied abroad when I was an undergrad. I went to Georgetown and got a master's in Arab studies. I spent a lot of time really trying to understand that. So I walked into it understanding the culture I was dealing with. Unfortunately, most Americans had no baseline. They had no cultural understanding and were very gullible as a result. I mean, the Iraqis just would laugh at us all the time. You people just believe everything we give you. So for me, my meter is like, I don't believe you until I can prove it. I don't believe it until I get good feedback that what you said, the car bomb was exactly where you said it was, or the IED was buried in this part of the road. And then I might start building up confidence in you as a source. But I wouldn't say that my approach was normal. I would say it was very abnormal because of my experience in the region.
Scott, knowing that from Michele and her peers who are maybe a little more overconfident, as a commander you're going to go out every day no matter what, because you've got a job to do and it's seek and close with, right? If you can get some help, that's great. We'd love to know where to go. But how confident do you need Michele to be? Like 60% confident? Because we are taking an educated guess.
There's no such thing as perfect.
Right.
I never subscribe to that adage. And I think that, just what Michele said was she's doing the best she can with what she has. And to think outside of the box, and I hate using that term, it's so gay, but I'll use it anyway. But it's being different. And I think also, you talk about it a little bit too, is, your diversity and the lens at which you look through was very unique, not only from your agency, but also looking at it at the culture that you were tasked to identify. One of the things I talk about and that I value immensely, not only as a commander on the ground, but as a Marine, as a leader, is having females in military units, having that female perspective. One of the things that we didn't do a good job of was tapping into the females on the battlefield. And had we had more female interpreters, female human collectors, female THT, dog handlers, I don't care what it was, that would have allowed us to tap into the females on the battlefield, because the guys were all sitting around at the internet cafes during the day when we're doing patrols or at night, and the females were not allowed to talk to us. But all the kids, when they ran around the city all day long, there were these little sets of eyeballs, kind of mini collectors. And then they come home, and who do they talk to? Mom. Mom knows everything, man. If my mom didn't know everything, something was wrong. But she was always a source of information. But we couldn't tap into that because culturally, we weren't allowed to. So it would have been a huge force multiplier. And I think as we move forward in every region that has cultural diversity, if we don't learn from this mistake, we're going to continue to repeat them.
Exactly. I'm not sure we've learned very much.
Agree.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm just such a big, I do really believe in working together and that everybody brings something really unique to the table. So I appreciate you saying that very much.
I actually have a academic paper about female.
You wrote an academic paper?
I wrote an academic paper with all of my brains.
I'm sitting here looking at all of his academic papers in the bookcase.
We wrote a paper and we titled it on purpose, the ethical pitfalls of female empowerment in conflict zones, because that shit is really hard to do. And you guys are right. We haven't learned the lessons. We don't do any kind of training. I mean, the training that we all had specific to our job is very detailed, and you can be mentored by somebody who knows. But like putting women on the battlefield, we haven't even begun to understand what that takes. So we're not just getting women
smoked. Put them in the battlefield, put them in the CIA, put them in all of these unique positions.
Oh, I got no problem with that.
They bring so much to the table.
Yeah.
And you were just talking about training. So, Michele, I want to have you weigh in on this, because we're recording this episode the day after the North Korean summit. And there's a lot of discussion right now about, troop withdrawal in the region, or I'd say probably more redistribution in the region. And as a guy that's not only fought in an area like that, I've also trained in those other regions.
Yeah.
And to do this is, in my opinion, it's a huge mistake. Because I'm a big proponent of regional stability and establishing a footprint in certain areas. And we learned those lessons again in World War II, in the European theater, in the Pacific theater. And to do that, to remove that, I think is a huge mistake. And I use this analogy. It's a new one I just popped up with Pete, and he approved of it. So, I'm a hunter. I grew up hunting in the Midwest, and even in California, you're still allowed to do it, believe it or not. But when you could walk through an entire forest, and there'll be all these crows just squawking and just waiting, these scavenger birds. But the minute you walk in with a rifle, they fly everywhere. They disappear. And I think that that's a great analogy, is that by establishing a presence, not nation building, not being occupiers, but having that forward presence shows these countries who are willing to drive off the road at times that the guy is there with a gun and we're not going to come back in.
Well, I think also you've established by having the forward operating bases or whatever, however you want to define that, you have developed an expertise in that area. And it's really hard to cut yourself off and withdraw from an area and then be told, oh, wait a minute, we need intel on that. Because you've then lapsed all your sources. You don't know how to get in touch with them. And people don't understand how long it takes to develop sources. So in the long run, it really hurts us.
Yeah, so we essentially would be like cutting off this massive conduit of information and building, maintaining, and cultivating those relationships. Would you agree with that from not only a counterterrorism perspective, but also like an anti-terrorism perspective? And you can tell the listeners the difference between the two.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you guys were in the same position that we were. As we were finishing our tours in Baghdad, we're like, everybody feels so good about themselves. We created this political space for us to withdraw from Iraq because obviously nobody really wanted to be there anymore. And we hadn't done a very good job at nation building because we don't know how to do that and shouldn't be doing that. The sectarian strife that we all saw every day on the streets of Iraq wasn't going anywhere. So you withdraw, but the key issues driving problems were still very much there and were not going away. And so what did that do? AQI morphed into ISIS. It's the same group, many of the same people, the same ideology, and it was just a morph.
Man. She's lighting candles in my church, Pete, because I always talk about that, how we as warriors never sit around and say, oh, woe is me, all the blood we spilled, all the money we spent was for naught, because we didn't plant that proverbial flag. And here's Michele, like, lighting candles in my church. I said, we didn't need a crystal ball to look back and say, if we don't establish a presence, we're going to be back. And sure enough, dial back the history dial, May 2015. Hey, Michele, what city did ISIS take a hold of in May of 2015?
Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq.
And Ramadi.
And Ramadi,
And Ramadi, the capital of Al-Anbar province.
Because if you control those two places, you control a lot of important things. Mosul will allow you to provision anything down in Baghdad.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. Do it. You're the guest.
Those of us who served there, was anybody shocked that ISIS appeared to the outside world to have just waltzed right in to open doors?
I was.
It took in a few hours.
Yeah, and what was... I will say the one galling thing is as they were driving around with their black ISIS flags doing the victory lap, they were doing it in all the trucks and gears that we left them.
Yep.
And I watched.
A hard pill to swallow.
I wonder where they're getting their tactic training from, and then I watched for half a second a guy walking around executing humans, and he was walking suspiciously like a U.S. SF soldier, how they would train, the smooth walking thing, had his gun up, and I'm like, oh God, we at least indirectly trained this guy.
Yeah, every time I saw one of those ISIS guys with his fingers straighten off the trigger, I'm like, God, why did we teach him that? I want him to shoot themselves in the foot. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys, because this is one of those things, and I don't want to put us in a bad spot, so I'll ask the question carefully, because, these things get people
You're
upset.
known for putting people in bad spots.
Well, I want to put you in an uncomfortable place and talk your way out of it. But, and Michele, you've got a command over the Arab and Islamic culture that I think will keep you safe. But the enemy would use mosques, and there was a lot of noise around the mosque. Like, is it good? Is it bad? And you as a commander, Scott, have to be very wary of, I know there's bad things in there, but I cannot go in there. Although you can in a very specific situation. But how did you guys, it's just the battlefield you're given. You can see it. Doesn't mean you can touch it. But then again, if there are nefarious things happening in there.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business, or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner,
or at JohnLG69.
At the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show. What do you guys? How do we deal with this better the next time we're around? I think that's the best question. What can we learn from that experience?
Well, it happened to me. Obviously,
Yeah.
I wrote about a situation where one of my interpreters, Big Sam, found actionable information. There were letters basically saying, "Hey, all the bad guys in town, the Americans are going to do a clearance operation. Stash all your weapons in the mosques." And I read it and I reread it and I said, "Hey, are you sure it says this? Because I'm about to call the big boss and let him know that we've got this." And he gave me the green light to raid that mosque. And on my own intuition, having multiple units out in the area in that part of the city,
Yeah.
I gave them the green light to raid 3 mosques, which I thought almost cost me my job the next morning. But when we went in, it was a treasure trove of weapons.
Yeah.
And, this was...
But it is a career-defining bet.
It was for me.
Yeah.
Because absolutely, what was that movie? Your career warning flashing light is going off. You see that? That's your career dissipation light. Like, that was me driving into the MEU commander's office the next day, and I was like, I'm going to be the officer handing out basketballs at the gym when I get back. But
Don't forget your towel.
But to his defense, he said, "You made the right call, Scott, and it's my decision. I gave you the approval to deviate from those really restrictive rules of engagement and go in that restricted area because it yielded such great results." And I think there's so much apprehension from the ground side. We were going in forbidden territory, and because it paid dividends, it was a big win for us. That was a success. But it also could have gone terribly wrong.
Yeah.
And part of that story, as you know, Pete, one of my Marines shot a female that was in the mosque in the elbow. And that happened because she charged right at him.
Yeah.
And it was a sad part of the story, but we always want to mitigate collateral damage. But the big picture, we scored big because less guns meant less guys shooting at us.
And I will say this too, for the intelligence community, we constantly got reports on weapons in the graveyard, weapons in the mosque. It was a right, Michelle? I mean, it was
constant theme, yes.
constant. And you just couldn't chase it all down. So Michelle, hit the ball back over to you. What are your thoughts on all of that? Surely you had that intel. I know we did. I never put my finger squarely on something that I thought would be worth Scott's career, and I definitely took that in mind.
I'd like to back up to what Scott said because I think it's really important.
I doubt that's true.
Scott, you said you had an intuition that was correct. You made an intuitive decision to go in there, but that intuition was based on what? Your local experience and experiences you had with these mosques and people associated with the mosque. Is that not correct?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're on the ground, and I liken it to the analogy of like community policing. You're out amongst the people, and you gain the atmospheric barometer to know what's going on in that area. And it could have gone, even though there was collateral damage, that the young lady got grazed in the elbow by one of the Marines. This could have really lit a huge bomb to explode in that part of the city. But when we messaged it appropriately the next day that we found all these weapons and we kind of paraded that on display, I think the local populace understood that, hey, these Marines, although we don't want them occupying our city, they really just scored big and took a bunch of the bad guy stuff away, which brings security to us and our families.
Absolutely. Not just to you guys. They're not just shooting at coalition forces. Their primary concern was, killing the other, the Sunni or the Shia or whatever. So yeah, that was something that benefited the entire community, except for the bad guys.
No, absolutely. It was, again, not urban legend, but they were mere obstacles in the way of any firefight we got in. Essentially, not saying this again cavalierly, but human shields. They were, people would die on the streets and they would literally use them as human body bags to hide behind. And it was disgusting from a humanitarian perspective, but this is what happened. This is the type of war we've been immersed in for over 12 years now since I was there, and it continues to go on. And I always remind people that who listen to Pete Show or any program is that we're still fighting in those areas. What do you think of that? That we're still in Afghanistan, we're still in Iraq, we're creeping into Syria, we're still in the Horn of Africa. What do you think of that?
Man, so my expertise is definitely not in Afghanistan, but I think that something is the other report that we would hear all the time was that the foreign fighters were coming in from Syria. The Syrian government obviously knew, supported that pipeline, and even gave them resources quite often. And it really used to tick us off, like the Syrian regime is providing the foreign fighters with a safe base from which to come into Al Anbar governorate and cause us such headaches and harm and all of that. Funny how that eventually turned on him.
That's interesting.
These Middle Eastern leaders often think, I can let in these bad guys with this horrible ideology, but I can control it. And it almost bites them in the butt every time.
Well, you talk about border problems in the U.S. and then the western part of Al Anbar province in Iraq, in cities like, Qaim and Rutba and Akashat, there is absolutely nothing stopping these people. And I described Rutba, which is almost the furthest west city in Al Anbar province that borders Jordan and Syria. It was like a truck stop of Iraq.
It was.
And there's a ton of bad guys just filtering through there, stopping to get gas, stopping to grab some food, and then they're like, hey, I'm trucking on over to Fallujah or Ramadi or Baghdad, and I'm going to blow some stuff up and kill some people. And there were all of these, what we call rat lines, basically trails that they would drive along. And this whole area, you have to understand, is about 400 by 400 miles square in just that little corner of Al Anbar province on the western border.
Yes.
Real challenge.
Yes, it was. Yeah, no trouble getting in, no trouble getting out, totally open. Everyone knows who you are and what you're doing. Totally allowed. Totally blew up in his face.
Okay, so if there's one agency or thing that we could have put in Iraq or could put in Iraq, we'll go around the table. I say it was an organization like the Department of Motor Vehicles should have been over there helping us. I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. It kind of sounds silly, but if we would have had one standard licensing or identification system that everyone carried around a real identification card so we could monitor this, or that's mine.
Yeah.
Michele?
Geez, that's a good question. And that was a really good answer.
I wasn't even thinking about it. Yeah. I wrote that down.
Yeah, you're going to have to skip me and come back to me on that one.
I'll go. And I've had this thought a bunch of times. And this will sound cavalier, but I do mean this. More places like Buffalo Wild Wings and Hooters. If you had dudes that are like, I could go make money and look at pretty girls and eat barbecue.
Totally agree with that.
Shit, yeah.
You read that article I wrote, Walmart wins the war.
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah. I have read your Walmart wins the war.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think something that just gives those young dudes something else
hope.
to do. Hope, titties, and have them go, wait, I can make money and I can work in the place that has girls with tight clothes on? Okay.
Tight orange burkas.
Yeah, whatever. However sexy you want to make it. And again, it sounds like a bit of a joke, but it's true. Like, so many of these guys are like we come in and say, we're going to create jobs for you. They're like, I can't work anywhere. Everybody in my family is either dead or they don't have enough. And I can't work for that guy across the field because he's not from my tribe.
Yeah.
And he's never... So we had these perceptions that we'd come in and do these things, but it just wasn't reality.
Right. And I think that when the Iraqi government forces came into these very Sunni areas of Al Anbar in order to establish, quote, security, many of whom were trained by the Iranians and often led by the Iranian unofficial forces, what you had was a very bad recipe of something that was going to explode again, a sectarian. So you've got the Shia with their foot down on top of the Sunnis' necks. That just can't go on and on and on without, it's a tinderbox waiting to explode, which obviously it did. And the Sunnis that were remaining in Ramadi and Mosul opened the doors for ISIS to flood in, as they did.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple analogies in there.
Bad guys.
Bad recipe and exploding time bomb. So is that like chili?
Yeah.
I'm thinking. But you still owe us one organization that has to go in.
Oh yeah. What's your great idea fix?
Oh, sorry, for me?
Yeah, yeah. You almost
Oh
wiggled
my
off the hook,
God.
but
Yeah.
Scott grabbed you.
Oh, yeah. I thought
She
you were
pulled a
laying me off.
Huesing.
No.
Oh, gosh. Probably outposts along with or near those Shia forces to do a better job of reporting the Iranian presence in those areas
Boy, what a
and what was
problem.
going on from a sectarian viewpoint.
Like who would do that though? The U.S. Equivalent, like Border Patrol checkpoints. Like
No idea. I don't know. Honestly,
like
they would
Homeland
never.
Security.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
As bad as the Iraqi army is, could you imagine like their version of like the Iraqi
No.
Homeland Security? It would be
No, it'd be silly. It would be silly because I've
Where
talked to all
would they
those
recruit
dudes.
those guys from?
I've talked to all the guys who are like, stand here and keep things safe. And that guy's like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm by myself. I have 4 bullets. My commander took $200 from me last month, even if it's to provision things. And I
Yeah.
once stopped a guy. These are actual tales. I once stopped a guy. He turned out to be someone's cousin. I almost lost my job. So I'm not in the stopping people business because there's no one behind me. There's no one in front of me. There's no one with me. So yeah, it's like, it's impossible.
Yeah, so talk about that's a good point because Michelle just mentioned it too, is about the Iraqi government and how corrupt it is. We talked earlier about the lying. So how do you get around that too to really establish the a form of democracy that we all want in that reason, not American democracy, but democracy, whatever form it takes. And from your perspective, Michelle, how do you or we establish that?
I don't think we can. I mean, in my most optimistic ideas, I'd love to, but they don't want it because it's not how they view government. It's not how Sharia law and Islam fundamentally views governing. So I don't think there is a way for us to create a real any semblance of what we might think of as a democracy.
So how do we get it so we're not back there every 10 years?
Stay. Just stay. Quit cutting the door out from under him and going, good luck. You know, I mean, how many times have we left the Kurds sitting there in the lurch? You know, we're going to back you guys and then just take off.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing is as you stabilize and put money into a very wealthy country, their 2 neighbors will work to undermine because they don't want Iraq to succeed. You know, and I'm not talking about Turkey and Syria. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I had a friend come in. He's going to be new on the team, and he's super smart, master's degree, Islam, all that kind of stuff, really good. And he's like, you have to understand the sectarian. I'm like, I understand that. Let me take you to the. So I took him to the SCIF, which is where they process top secret information. I'm like, I'm going to take 10 seconds in here, look at a chart, and I'm going to show you the link without even trying. And of course, there's a link. Doesn't matter Sunni, Shia. This is politics in this case. This is regional power, and the Saudis may disagree with each other, but they for sure agree that they don't want a strong, stable Iraq. So they're going to invest a lot of money in keeping Iraq on its heels because they have to.
Yeah.
You can't fix that. And then if the Sunnis who were in power, and it's a bad analogy, but it's the best one I have, if like the Sunnis were the whites and the Shias were the black, for most of Saddam's reign, they got all the education, they got all the privilege and all those kind of things.
Yep.
When the scale flips the other way, the Sunnis are going to fight as hard as they can to hold their power. So it's sectarian, but it's also politics. So when the Sunnis don't vote in the first election en masse and they're like, fuck that, we're not going to do it, we all should have known, oh shit, there's going to be a fight. Because when the election's held, you're like, oh God, all the people from the army, all the people who were killing all the Iraqis just lost all their political power. Oh fuck.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then they started chopping heads. Yeah.
It's all about political power. And we've done a very terrible job of staying on top of what Iran is up to and kind of acknowledging the extent of their influence. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Bush or Obama administrations, it was really the same thing. I originally saw it in Bush. We didn't want to admit that we'd essentially given Iraq to Iran on a silver platter. So therefore, collecting a great deal of intelligence on that problem was just going to show how dumb we were and unsuccessful. And then being able to, essentially Obama's administration giving Iran back all these resources it's just a huge mistake. They're such a destabilizer for that entire region, and they continue to spend money killing people and being behind
I think
terrorism.
that's so
That
great. Is
yeah.
for those that understand the region, Iran is to Iraq what Mexico is to the United States. There's a lot of bad stuff goes on down there, a lot of corruption, a lot of destabilization, and then you've got another massive border share like Saudi Arabia in Iraq, which is our Canada. Like, yeah, they're there. We know they got money. They'll help out a little bit. Like, there's like one big Canadian during the war, like the only Canadian that ever showed up over there. And they kind of like they're kind of like milk toast.
They mostly hang out in the chow hall.
Yeah, it's like milk toast. Like a piece of white bread and milk. Like it's milk that's just soggy, just there. But
God.
they could do something, but choose not to. And then you've got a place that you don't want to go down into, like Iran. But they're still funding. They're still pushing stuff across the border. Is that pretty close to what we're looking at over there?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. They really kind of pull the strings in Iraq.
I don't want anyone to think that analogy makes Iraq like the United States, though. Like, that's not the point of that.
It's you're just trying to draw a parallel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I like to break it down. We're breaking it down.
This is fascinating. By the way, so we're talking to best-selling authors, Michele Rigby Assad and Scott Huesing. Their books are available, of course, on their websites. Yours is MicheleRigbyAssad.com, and Scott, yours, you want people to buy it on Amazon, right?
Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon. And in Michelle's book, it's on Amazon. It's crushing it, man.
Yeah.
She's out there. She's doing it right.
And what I want you guys to do is, in support of these authors that write these great books, and look at the time they're giving us and the great insight, go on there and rate their books 5 stars, give a review, because this is what helps them continue to tell us these stories. So that's my favor I'm asking of you guys. For sure do that. Hey, Michele, I wanted to bring up your blog that you wrote to the new CIA director, Gina Haspel, and get some thoughts from you. And I don't know if we need to go down this road. You know what? Never mind that road. We'll come back to that next time. Let's talk about your blog and what you wrote in your sort of open letter to how you think the CIA can be improved under a new boss.
Yes. So if you watched media, you would think there literally was only one question, and that was about torture or enhanced interrogation methods. There were no other serious questions that could be asked about Gina Haspel and her preparedness to lead the CIA, or any other questions about what the CIA is really up against right now. And as someone who worked there for 10 years, it really annoyed me how we would never discuss what was happening within the CIA that really crippled us from being so much better. And that is the fact that we don't know how to hire the best and then retain the best. It's a revolving door of people who, I always say, whenever you've got a secret organization, whether it's CIA or the Secret Service, or the more secretive it is, the more poisonous the culture is inside. And so there are so many people that I worked with that put their lives on the line every day and were really committed to doing that for their country. But then you get to a point where you've been so abused by the people you're working for that you think, you know what, there's so many other things I could be doing to make the world a better place, and then walk back out the door. So I think there's just an incredible brain drain in the CIA because of the way that the CIA is organized and these little kingdoms that are set up around the world where the COS is in charge, and the COS has no idea how to actually lead a group of people. Very different than the military, where you lead through example and you lead by being in the front and doing it. And so I think that's one of the biggest problems that has never discussed, never debated, never addressed. So I'm very passionate about saying that the people inside the CIA really need the organization to just be we need a very, very strong leader who's willing to say, this is not okay. America deserves better.
Yeah. We do deserve better. And as someone who works in the intel community, I've seen how the CIA people act. And you're not as arrogant as a whole, to be unfairly characterize you guys all in one group. But you're not as bad as the State Department, but it's not a whole lot better. There's a lot of arrogance and infallibility. And in those kind of spaces, in the conflict zones, it's just too hard to be that right. It's impossible to be that right that often. And there is an accountability ladder problem, which is where everybody, and you write about it in your blog, where everybody's oriented up to their boss's boss, instead of trying to figure out how to get better on the ground. Because the ground truth and big organizations like the CIA, those things don't make sense. So you guys are forced to operate from what I would call a spaceship, because you're nowhere near the ground. And shit gets weird, you know?
Yes.
Like, you should be able to talk to Scott, and I don't want to complicate the system, but you and Scott should have not had this many years pass before you interacted professionally. He's putting his Marines' lives on the line. You need to understand that directly, but that's not how the system operates.
Well, I think too, I know you and Michele have talked about it before, is there, and I love it too, that you're talking about, Director Haspel and, that great success story and how you had your own challenges of going into this job. And I love that quote that I'm looking at right now, is like, being uncertain about your ability to do the job. And like, everybody has those, but it's always got to be the right person for the right job for the right reason. And when you were in Iraq making those decisions, that connection to ground units, you were not able to get out there because of the language barrier disparity. Despite having complete proficiency in the modern standard Arabic language, there was a difference. And also being a woman, to get out there and really gauge the effectiveness of the information. Talk to us about that.
Well, I was actually, the one good thing that leadership did do on the ground was said, hey, if you guys want closer access to the guys you're going to be working with, then we want to facilitate that. So that was an incredible leadership decision, which I will always praise, that there was a mechanism set up for your guys and my guys to talk more. But it was really incumbent upon us, whether it was our personality or our style, to do so. And there are a lot of people who are just so overwhelmed in their jobs, they didn't have the time to do that. But imagine, Scott, taking your troops, into combat without knowing the strengths and the weaknesses of each person on your team. Can you imagine that?
I can't. That chemistry and that bond was everything to us. That's what allowed us to fight and win and survive in the deadly city of Iraq. It's the most important thing, because at the end of the day, and you can attest to this, is it's all about the people. It's a people business.
It's a people business. So imagine I show up and multiple countries, never asked by my chief what I was bringing to the table, never had a conversation with me. Michele, what did you study? What's your strengths? What do you want to learn? Do you know I didn't have those conversations? They never, ever reached out. They had no idea what the people on the team were
I wish I had
achieving.
Michele with me, because I was that guy, and I write about it in Echo and Ramadi. I used a little unconventional method too, because I was very unabashed at taking every strange ranger that could carry a gun or had a capability. I was notorious for it. I'd be back at Blue Diamond or Camp Ramadi or wherever, and I'd see some dude in the chow hall and say, hey, what do you do? Who do you work for? You want to come out with me? And I'd scoop him up, and I'd send him over to Tom Foster, my first sergeant, and have him report in, and they'd go out in zone with me, whether they were civil affairs or combat photographers. They were enablers, and they brought this game-changing element to what we did day in and day out. And, Tom Foster was like, Jesus, sir, like, who is this strange ranger you're sending me now? I'm like, just send them to first platoon. Yeah. Get them out in the zone. Get them doing what they're trained to do. Find out more about them. And the Marines loved it.
Yeah, I loved to borrow Marines when I was going out collecting, because I always needed someone to carry.
Because Pete walked around with ice cream.
Yeah, I got ice cream. I'm trying to make friends, but I need someone to watch my back. I literally
he had a cooler in his Humvee.
I would have rangers that assigned to me, like, this is your ranger. And I had this guy, Sergeant Glass, and he's like, wherever you go, Pete, you don't got to worry about a thing. And I'm like, awesome. I was there to do a different job. But that commander got it.
Nice.
I can see your Humvee looking like the Good Humor ice cream truck driving around the battlefield. Like, and the insurgents were probably like, don't shoot that. It's an ice cream truck.
Ice cream man. Leave him alone. Michele, I don't know if you know, but I used ice cream a lot to my benefit, and our chow hall.
Bribes for the listeners.
I would bring I'm using quoted fingers, distinguished visitors in, like members of parliament, whatever it was. I'm like, this guy's going to come on the camp and hang out. And what we're not going to do is frisk this person. We're going to let them come on the camp like a respected VIP. Like, if a House of Representatives member came on the post, they wouldn't get frisked. I'm like, this person not only is that, but they're that in this country. So they're going to come in and I'm going to feed them instead of the other way around. And holy shit, did that change the game. It just totally changed it. And then the commander would walk by and be like, who the fuck is Pete talking to? Jesus Christ.
Michele, what did you use to get people to give you information? It could have been, was it some sort of concession? Was it safety, security? Was it ice cream? I don't know. What did you use? How do you? and people have to know Pete loves ice cream too.
I do. I love ice cream.
I don't know how much he gave away and how much he ate. But, what did you use?
I learned how to stroke people's ego and make them feel important and part of the team.
Ego up.
People all want to have a purpose. And if you could figure out what matters to that person, and we all want to be important. We all want to feel like we matter. And so if I could find a way to stroke their ego, I could get what I needed from them.
Stroking an ego and valuing input from people as individuals, I think that's a very gray area. And in your community, or whether it's a guy on the ground or in Pete's job, that's where the science becomes art and vice versa, I think, is that there's some people that you have to stroke their ego because they may be potential sources of information. And then there's just regular people that you want to value what they have to say and listen. And when you don't do that, I found that we missed a lot of opportunities because we were so busy engaging the enemy. There were opportunities missed where we could have maybe taken a short pause in action to gain some information, but it was just so hard to extract because we didn't have the tools to do it. We didn't have tools like you or THT or Human or guys like our Army counter intel guys that were really the only tool you could use to wedge in that door jamb on the hasp and bust it open. That's what's needed in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was such a danger when colleagues would just think to themselves, "I'm just dealing with a quote another source." Every single source was different, and if you fundamentally did not realize you're dealing with a human being, you're not going to be talking to them in a way that resonates with them. And you and all, we're talking about Iraqi culture. They can smell a rat a mile away, and if you're not being genuine or authentic in what you're saying, again, such street smart guys that knew how to read
Yeah, they may have had
quickly.
the equivalent of a second grade education, but despite that lying, they do smell fear and they want authenticity. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I always thought they acted like abused kids, and also think about the psychological damage. If we come back with problems, they live in that problem. They don't get to escape it. So if you approach them like the same thing, like then you've not got enough tools in your bag, or you're relying on the screwdriver too much, and you've got to get to work in a different way, whether it's ego up, ego down, or whatever it's going to be. There's tons of tools to get after him, and you have to be able to, people like Michele and I have to be able to build trust and do it fast, and they don't have any trust in their trust bank. So we've got to front trust to them so they can go, oh, this person actually might be all right. Might be.
Yeah.
And then 6 months down the line, you're like, oh, that person actually does care about me. But you have to actually care, which is a big emotional investment for us.
Well, as a guy on the ground, I think the information that guys like Pete and Michele provided, 99% of the time, were very helpful. I think there was a very infrequent occurrences where we landed on an HVT and came up dry. So those were very few and far between.
That's good success.
That's a metric of success, and I say, again, to any of the Intel community guys, listen, thanks, and Semper Fi.
Michele, what do you want to add before we close up? Because we've had you for about an hour.
For folks that are still serving in government in any capacity, I think that really encouraging them to have the courage to do what others don't do. Like, I love, Pete, that you were taking ice cream out. Like, that just suited your personality, and I'm sure that was something nobody else did. Like, having the courage to see things differently and do things differently. For me, it was like everybody was used to dealing with CIA folks and other agencies that were jerks. I'm actually like, I'm a nice person. I want to work with you. What?
Yeah.
What?
That would be rare, honestly. That would be rare.
And so I just tell people, like, find a way to do what you think needs to be done. And most of the time you can figure that out a way to make it happen.
I think that's great right there. Michele, thank you so much. We can do this again, I'm hoping, because you need to sell more books, and I need to talk to you more. I'm still working on an idea on how to do Den of Spies. I'd love to get all of us together and just do like in front of an audience, do some of this stuff. And Scott, thank you for co-hosting.
Always my pleasure.
You guys got to make sure you buy these books. I've read both of them cover to cover, and they are excellent. So MicheleRigbyAssad.com. You can follow her on social media. She is not hard to find, and she actually... Get this, she actually wants to talk to you. Make sure you support her and her book, 5 stars on all that stuff. And of course, Scott is at Eklund Ramadi on all social media. You can buy his book on Amazon, and he definitely appreciates 5 stars. This is what these guys do now. Instead of going hiding in a corporation somewhere and being comfortable, they're trying to tell their story so we can all be smarter and live a little richer lives. And I say we support them. So thank you guys both for giving me the time today, and I appreciate both of you.